The little girl with blood on her hands, I found her in the rain. It had been raining for 3 straight hours. The kind of cold rain that cuts through skin and turns every street in West Chicago into a strip of gray and water. I sat curled beneath an old tarp, my back pressed against a wall of frozen brick, trying to hold on to whatever warmth remained inside my thin jacket. Tonight was the 4th night I'd slept in this alley. I'd grown used to the stench of garbage, the rumble of trucks rolling by, and the hollow ache of hunger that felt like a part of me now. But then I heard it, a soft, broken sound, a child's sob, trembling and uneven, as if trying desperately to hide. I looked up. In the corner of the alley, behind a dented metal bin, a small shape was huddled tight. Under the weak yellow of a streetlight, I saw a little girl, maybe 5 years old, her white dress smeared with mud, clinging to her body like damp paper. Her black curls hung heavy and wet, and when she lifted her face, I saw her hands shaking, streaked with faint blood that thinned and ran with the rain. I rose, legs unsteady with cold and fear. 6 months on the streets had taught me that getting involved was the fastest way to vanish without a trace. But the way she looked at me made my chest tighten. Her eyes were wide and dark, filled with a panic so raw, it felt like the world had just collapsed before her. I had once looked at life that way not too long ago. I stepped closer, slowly, palms raised so she wouldn't be afraid. "Hey, kid, are you hurt?" My voice came out rough from the cold. She didn't answer, just pressed herself deeper into the corner, shoulders trembling. I saw the scrape on her left knee, a thin cut but slick with rain. I crouched down, speaking as gently as if she were a patient, the old instinct from my nursing days surfacing even though I had long since abandoned my white coat. "It's all right. I just want to help a little. I've got some bandages." That wasn't true. All I had was a strip of cloth in my pocket. But she didn't know that. After a long moment, she nodded faintly, lips pale and trembling. I want to go home," she whispered, so softly I had to lean closer to hear. "What's your name?" I asked. "Elena." The name sounded tender, out of place in this grimy corner of the city. I tore a piece from my sleeve and dabbed the wound, steadying my hands. "There. That's better. Just a scratch." "Elena. Where are you from? How did you end up here?" She bit her lip, tears mixing with the rain. "Some bad men took me. They said they were taking me back to Papa. But I ran away when the car stopped." My heart sank. The air itself seemed to thicken at her words. "Kidnapped." I should have stood up and walked away right then, the way my instincts screamed for me to. But I couldn't. This child was shaking in a luxury dress, stranded in an industrial district, crawling with addicts and criminals, under a freezing rain. "Listen to me, Elena," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We'll find someone to help. There's a church nearby St. Lublaga. Jude. They never close their doors." Her eyes widened. "Frightened. Papa said not to trust the police. Only family." There was something unnervingly grown-up in the way she said it, as if the words had been drilled into her. A family that warns its child never to trust the police. A little girl kidnapped at night. A designer dress. None of this made sense. Then I heard engines in the distance. 2, maybe 3 cars. Headlights swept across the wet brick walls. Elena clutched my hand, voice trembling. "They're back." I didn't think. I grabbed her, pulling us into the shadows behind a stack of old crates. My heart pounded against my ribs. My breath came in gasps. Shapes emerged through the rain, 3 men in dark suits and polished shoes, moving with a danger that no downpour could wash away. One of them barked something in Italian short. Sharp syllables. I couldn't catch all of it. Only a few words that stuck in my mind. La bambina, Vincenzo, il capo. The girl, the boss. I held Elena close, pressing her face against my shoulder to keep her quiet. The smell of rain, garbage, and fear thickened around us. They passed within a few steps. I saw the gun at the leader's side glint in the light before they disappeared down the alley. I didn't breathe until the footsteps faded. Elena lifted her head slightly and whispered, so soft only I could hear, "Papa will come. He'll find me." I didn't know who her papa was, but I knew this. Anyone who could send 3 armed men searching for his daughter in the middle of a storm in Chicago wasn't just anyone. I looked toward the blurred lights beyond the rain and took a deep breath. "All right, Elena, we're leaving. I know somewhere safe." I pulled her tighter and stepped out into the downpour. I didn't realize it then. But that moment, the second I carried a stranger's child and ran into the night, was the moment my life changed course. A turn that would lead me straight toward the devil, and somehow, back to myself. The rain hadn't stopped when we wound our way through the narrow alleys of West Chicago. I kept my steps light, pressing myself against the walls whenever headlights or footsteps approached. My hands were numb, but I clung to the child as if letting go for even a second would make her vanish into the dark. Elena no longer cried. She just gripped my jacket, her face buried against my shoulder, soaked with rain and cold sweat. I didn't know if she trusted me or if I was simply the only person without a gun, but I knew fear was guiding her every move. I stopped at the corner near an abandoned gas station, hiding in a narrow gap between 2 buildings. My breath came fast and shallow. My heart wild in my chest. My mind was chaos. What should I do? Take her to the police? No. She had said not to trust them, and that warning didn't come from a child's imagination. Someone had taught her that. Probably Papa. The man she still spoke of with such faith. I looked down at her. Elena gazed back, her dark eyes deep and steady. A strange mix of innocence and resolve. "We can go to St. Persant's. Jude's." I murmured, "It's just 3 blocks away. Father O'Malley won't ask questions. He's helped me before." She nodded faintly, even in silence. I knew she understood. I had spent many nights at St. Tinks of Time. Jude's when I first drifted onto the streets. Father O'Malley never asked why. He never judged. He'd hand me a towel, a bowl of hot soup, and sometimes a few quiet words of advice. It was one of the few places where the world still had light. We crossed the street, slipping between parked cars with flat tires and overturned trash bins. I walked fast but didn't run too risky. Whenever headlights flashed our way, I shielded her, tucking her head beneath my arm. She didn't make a sound. Didn't ask when we'd get there. Her silence surprised me. Not the frightened silence of a child, but the silence of someone who's already seen too much. Finally, I saw the weathered wooden sign St. L.E. Jude's Church, a place of faith and compassion. The light above the gate was dim, but the door was open. As always, I pushed it gently and stepped inside with Elena in my arms. The smell of damp wood and half-burned candles wrapped around us like a weary embrace. Father O'Malley sat in the front pew, slightly hunched, an old Bible resting in his hands. When he turned, his eyes rested on me for barely a second before shifting to the child. He didn't ask. He simply stood and said quietly, "Come with me." He led us into a small room behind the confessional, a simple space with a narrow bed, clean towels, and a pot of hot water on an electric stove. I laid Elena down, pulling off her soaked shoes. Father O'Malley brought an old knitted sweater, likely a donation from one of the parish families. Elena curled under the blanket, her eyes fluttering shut with exhaustion. I sat beside her, holding her hand until her breathing grew soft and steady. Then the priest finally spoke, his voice no louder than a prayer. "Who is she?" I answered with a sigh. "A child who shouldn't be where I live." I told him everything, or at least what I knew. A little girl, her hands stained with blood, hiding behind a trash bin. Men with guns speaking Italian. the story of a father Papa she believed would find her. I didn't tell him my name, or why I was out there in the rain. He didn't ask. When I finished, he only nodded slowly. Do you understand what you're stepping into? Claire, I said nothing. I didn't know. All I knew was that I had carried a stranger's child out of the rain. And now she was sleeping peacefully in what had once been my last refuge. I knew one thing for certain: if I went back and left her behind, I would never forgive myself. I rose and pulled the thin blanket up around Elena's shoulders. I know, I said quietly, but I can't leave her. I didn't add the rest out loud, that if I abandoned her, I would also be abandoning the last good piece of myself. And I wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. Not with this child. Outside the small window of the room behind Saint Equate, Jude's, the rain still fell softly, each drop stretching time as it slid down the glass. Elena slept soundly, her breathing light. Her face softened under the dim amber light. Looking at her, I felt something strange, a mix of distance and familiarity. Perhaps because I had once seen that same fear in my own reflection. Once longed for someone to appear and say, "It's going to be all right." But now, I was the one who had to say it. I stepped into the hallway and gently closed the door behind me. Father O'Malley sat at a small wooden table, his hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. He looked at me quietly, waiting. I sat across from him, running my fingers through my damp hair. "I need to call her, Father," I said at last. He didn't seem surprised. He only nodded. Then reached beneath the table and pulled out an old flip phone, the kind he kept for emergencies. I took it from him, my hands trembling slightly. "Are you sure?" he asked evenly. "I can't keep her forever. And I don't think this is just a random kidnapping. There's something about her. It's different. The way she speaks. Her name. And those 3 men with guns last night." Father O'Malley nodded again. "I understand. But once you make that call, this door can't be closed again." I drew a deep breath and began to dial. The number wasn't written anywhere. It came from Elena's memory. When I'd asked, she'd closed her eyes and recited it like a prayer. 8 digits. Clear and precise. Not something a 5-year-old should be able to remember. The line rang 3 times. The air in the room seemed to still. On the 4th ring, a voice came through deep, slow, and cold as ice. "Who is this?" I swallowed hard. "My name is Claire. I think I have your daughter." She said her name is Elena. "I found her last night in an alley. She was hurt. I'm not with the police." Silence stretched on the line. Just as I opened my mouth to speak again, the voice returned lower this time. Almost a whisper, but sharp with authority. "Where are you?" I glanced at Father O'Malley. He gave a small nod. "At St. Jude's Church, 14th Street and Lincoln Avenue." A brief pause, then the man spoke again. Not to me, but to someone near him. His tone shifted. Firm. Commanding. "Get the car. Bring 2 men. Then back to me. Don't leave. Keep the girl with you. Let no one see her. I'll be there in 15 minutes. The line went dead. I stared at the blank screen, feeling as though I'd just opened a door without knowing where it led. I think I just spoke to the devil. I whispered, eyes fixed on the phone. Father O'Malley didn't answer. He stood and walked toward the window. After a long moment, he said quietly, "That name, Dominic Moretti. You just called the most powerful man in Chicago's underworld. They call him the man without a heart." I turned to him. "You know him. Never met him," he said. "But everyone's heard of him. The South Pier takeover, 12 people disappeared without a trace. The police won't go near him. His wife was murdered 3 years ago. Since then, he's been worse than ever. But they say he loves his daughter more than his own life." I looked toward the closed door where Elena slept. A man like that, capable of such violence, yet able to love his child like that. I didn't know what awaited me after that call, but I knew there was no turning back. A man like Dominic Moretti doesn't let someone keep his daughter without consequence. I might be stepping into something deeper, darker than anything I'd ever faced. But at least tonight, I had done what was right. And if I had to pay for it, I would. Engines roared in the distance. I stood, inhaling sharply. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and I had never felt my heart beat so fast. The sound of motors echoed down the street, stretching the air inside the church until it felt suffocating. Through the frosted window, I saw headlights cutting across the bare trees before stopping at the gate. 3 black SUVs, bulletproof. Sleek, pulled up without a sound. Their lights went out simultaneously. The world seemed to hold its breath. My pulse quickened. Not entirely from fear, but from something else, an uncertainty that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting for the ground to give way. Father O'Malley motioned for me to step aside as he went to open the great wooden door. Slow but steady. The man who entered first needed no introduction. I knew instantly it was Dominic Moretti, not because of the 2 men behind him, each keeping half a step behind, nor the tailored black suit and long coat that trailed with his stride. It was the look in his eyes, calm, cold, yet so intense that the room itself seemed to drop a few degrees. Dominic was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair neatly cropped, his face carved with the kind of beauty that left no room for softness. His eyes were steel gray, emotionless, unmoving, the eyes of someone who had lived too long in darkness and forgotten what light looked like. I stood before him, forcing myself to stay composed. Dominic said nothing at first. He only looked at me once, twice before his gaze shifted to the closed door behind me, the one leading to Elena. "Your name is Claire." His voice was deep, rough-edged, each word measured as though weighed before spoken. I nodded. "Yes, I'm the one who found your daughter." He didn't react as I expected in a rush. No, visible relief. He simply studied me for another second before signaling to one of the men behind him. The man stepped to Elena's door, opened it slightly, then stepped back. Dominic moved forward, placing his hand on the knob, pushing it open slowly, reverently, almost like entering a sacred place. A small gasp, then a whisper, fragile as wind. "Papa." Dominic stepped inside, and the door closed softly behind him. I couldn't see, only stood there, my heart still pounding. Father O'Malley came to stand beside me, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You've just met the most dangerous man in this city." I nodded, needing no further confirmation. There was something about Dominic that set him apart from every man I had ever met. His presence carried a gravity that made people retreat by instinct, a quiet kind of dominance that required no raised voice. I had the distinct feeling that if Dominic wished it, he could make anyone kneel with nothing more than a look. A few minutes later, the door opened. Dominic emerged, carrying Elena in his arms. She rested her head against his shoulder, still fast asleep, but her small hands clung to his collar, as if afraid she might disappear if she let go. "I owe you a debt," Dominic said, his eyes locking on mine. "And I don't forget debts." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to ask about the men with guns the night before, about why Elena had been taken, about the world she had just escaped from. But I knew this wasn't the moment. "I'm taking her home now," Dominic continued, then paused. "You can come with us, if you want." He blinked, startled. "Why?" "Because she won't sleep unless she sees you. And because I want to understand the woman who dared to carry my daughter through the night, knowing she could die for it." I looked at him, and for the first time since Dominic had entered the church, I saw something flicker in his steel-gray eyes, faint, like a thread of light barely visible in the dark, but real. I turned to Father O'Malley. He gave a single, calm nod, without another word. I walked toward Dominic, and as I passed him, heading for the car, I realized something. The truly dangerous men are not the ones who hold guns. They are the ones who can make you step into their car, fully aware you are driving straight into the devil's den. Inside the black SUV, silence hung heavy. Elena was curled in my lap, her head resting against my shoulder, sound asleep. The thin blanket Dominic had handed me before we got in still carried a faint scent of musk and tobacco, strange but comforting. Dominic sat across from me, his back against the leather seat, legs crossed, hands clasped loosely on his knee. The dim interior lights brushed across the sharp planes of his face, catching the calm, unblinking intensity of his stare fixed on me. The ride passed in silence for several minutes, filled only by the soft hum of the engine and the rhythmic tapping of rain on the roof. I could feel him watching, assessing every movement I made, as if reading a classified file. "Who are you?" Dominic asked at last, his voice deep and steady, free of any warmth. I lifted my gaze. "I told you. Claire. I'm the one who found Elena. No one just finds Elena," he said, narrowing his eyes. "She escaped 3 men who were trained professionals, and somehow, she ended up in the arms of a homeless woman. On the very night I was about to tear this city apart. I don't know who they were," I said, keeping my tone even. "I just heard crying. Then I saw her. I had no reason to get involved, unless you count the fact that she needed help." Dominic tilted his head, his gray eyes sharp enough to cut through my skin. "Do you know who Elena is? I'm guessing she isn't just any little girl. She's the reason a lot of people are dead people, whose bodies were never found." I froze. He didn't say it as a threat, but as a brutal truth. Dominic wasn't boasting. He was simply reminding me that I had stepped into a world where lives could be extinguished as easily as a flame between 2 fingers. "And you knew none of this," he continued. "Yet you still carried her through the rain." I met his gaze. "Yes, because she's a child, not a piece of property. And if you really are her father, then you should be grateful someone still sees that." Silence descended again, thick and heavy. Dominic's stare lingered on me. But this time it was different. Not softer, that word didn't belong to him, but there was a glimmer of reevaluation. A faint shift in the air. "Elena said you were the first person who didn't scream when she had blood on her hands." I shrugged, looking out the window. "I used to be a nurse, and now you live on the streets. It's a long story. But yes." He gave a small nod, as if a piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. "I don't believe in coincidences," he said quietly. "You could be part of a setup, a trap, or worse, a pawn placed exactly where I needed to find you. You're free to think that." I replied, "But if I were part of any plan, I wouldn't have called you." Dominic leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving mine. "No, you're not like the others I've met. That's why you're in this car." It sounded like both a warning and a compliment wrapped in one sentence. I said nothing. Part of me wanted to demand he let me out, to walk away from this deadly game. But another part, the one holding Elena, refused to let go. Dominic glanced at his daughter, then back at me. "Where do you think you'll go after this?" I stroked Elena's hair gently. "I don't know, but I'm not leaving her." For a brief second, Dominic said nothing. Then he turned toward the window. "We're almost there." And I knew then, even if I had no plan, even if my life had been nothing but chaos, my fate was now intertwined with the sleeping child in my arms, and with the man sitting before me. The man everyone in this city whispered about in fear, Dominic Moretti. The car slowed, then came to a halt before a towering iron gate, nearly 2 stories high, its black steel gleaming under the lights. Security cameras rotated silently, and the faint glow from the stone pillars cast the place in the eerie stillness of a fortress. The gate opened soundlessly. As we drove through, I felt as if we had crossed into another world, one of silence, power, and absolute control. The Moretti estate unfolded ahead. Massive and austere gray stone walls. Slate blue roofs. Not a single window open. Mist curled over the courtyard under dim lights, making the mansion look like something between a monastery and a military compound. When the car finally stopped, Dominic was the first to step out. His 2 guards followed, their movements sharp, scanning the area not just for danger but for possibility. Dominic turned back to me, still holding Elena. "This way," he said simply, not asking, only commanding. I followed, my shoes heavy with water, my heart still unsure why I was here at all. The familiar instinct of someone who has spent years running rose in my chest, the urge to flee, to vanish before it was too late. But then, that small voice inside me spoke steady, unwavering. Elena. I couldn't leave her. Not when her tiny hand still reached for my wrist in her sleep. Not when she had chosen to trust me in a world where every adult seemed to betray her. Inside the mansion, the air grew colder. The ceiling rose impossibly high. The walls paneled with dark wood, and the faint amber light stretched the endless corridor into something that felt like time itself refusing to move. Dominic didn't stop until we reached the eastern wing, a spacious drawing room where a fire had already been lit. He placed Elena gently on the sofa, pulled a fur blanket over her, and then turned to face me. "Sit," he said, motioning to the armchair across from him. I obeyed, clasping my hands together in my lap, still trembling, partly from the cold, partly from caution. Dominic stood for a moment, then crossed to the liquor cabinet and poured 2 glasses of scotch. He set one in front of me, but I didn't touch it. "I'm a man of my word," he began. "You brought my daughter back safely. I don't know what happened out there, but that's irrelevant now. What matters is the outcome. You can take the money, leave this city, and forget we ever existed. $10,000 for one night. How does that sound?" I lifted my eyes to him, meeting his gaze. "You think I helped your daughter for money?" Dominic tilted his head slightly, not smiling, not mocking. "I think everyone has a price." "Then I don't," I said evenly. "Or at least, not the kind you're imagining." He said nothing, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I spoke before he could take back control of the conversation. "I won't take your money, but I won't leave either. Elena trusts me, and I don't want her to wake up in a strange place without me. She'll panic." Dominic set his glass down on the table, his eyes narrowing, sharp as a blade. "So what do you want?" "I want to stay, just for a few days, until she's better. I won't ask about you, about this place, or about whatever it is you do. I don't need to know. I don't want to know. But I have one condition. You're setting conditions for me." "No," I said calmly. "I'm setting boundaries. I'm here for Elena, not for you, not for your money, and not because I'm curious. But I want everything to end there. No one asks me about my past, and I don't ask anyone about their future. If you can agree to that, I'll stay. If not, I'll walk out tonight." Dominic fell silent. He sat down opposite me, elbows on his knees, his gaze steady and analytical, like a chess master studying a new piece that didn't quite fit on his board. I didn't look away. Our eyes met, 2 mirrors reflecting a quiet standoff. Finally, he gave a small but decisive nod. "Fine, but if you break that agreement, there won't be a second chance." "I don't need a second chance," I replied softly. "I just need Elena to have a first one, the chance to feel safe." Dominic didn't respond. He stood and walked out, leaving me alone with the crackle of fire and the first hint of warmth seeping through my fingers. For a brief moment, I realized I had stepped one pace deeper into his world. Not for money, not for power, but because a child had without meaning to. Reminded me how to be human again. When I woke the next morning, I was in a room unlike any I'd slept in for months. No car horns. No stench of garbage. No cold seeping through my bones. The sheets were soft. The blanket smelled faintly of lavender. Gentle daylight filtered through thick beige curtains. Brushing across the quiet room, on a small wooden table near the window, sat a glass of water and a neatly folded towel. The silence was almost unreal. If it weren't for the broken dreams replaying in my mind, Dominic's voice, his cutting stare, and Elena curled on the sofa before the fire, I might have believed I was still dreaming. The door opened quietly, and an older woman stepped in. She wore a long gray dress, her hair coiled neatly in a bun. Small round glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. Her face betrayed no emotion, but her eyes were sharp, as if she could see straight through me. "Miss Clare, I presume." Her voice was husky but precise. Every word measured. I sat up, smoothing my shirt. "Yes, that's me. Welcome to the Moretti household. I'm Mrs. Hardwick, the housekeeper. Mr. Moretti asked me to prepare a private room for you. For now, this is the guest suite. Would you prefer a hot bath, fresh clothes, or coffee?" First I blinked, caught off guard by the civility in her tone. Polite, but not warm. She spoke like someone who had managed a household for years without ever needing to raise her voice. "I just need to know how Elena is," I said, stepping onto the thick carpet that almost erased the blisters on my feet. "The child slept well through the night. No nightmares. Likely thanks to you." She studied me for a moment, then turned toward the door. "Bathe first. When you're ready, I'll take you to her." I showered hot water. For the first time in months, steam fogged the mirror, and for a fleeting moment, I let myself be weak. The warmth ran down my back, washing away the grime of sleepless nights, the stale scent of alleyways, the memory of hunger and cold. I didn't let the feeling linger. I dried off, put on the pale blue dress laid out for me, and stepped back into the hallway. Mrs. Hardwick was waiting, another pair of glasses in hand. "You look considerably better." "Thank you," I said. We walked down a long carpeted hall lined with framed oil paintings, each one perfectly aligned, each potted plant placed with mathematical precision. She said nothing until we reached the final door on the eastern end. "Elena's inside. She's asked for you 3 times since she woke up." The words loosened something in my chest. I nodded gratefully, then turned the handle and stepped inside. Elena was sitting in an armchair, clutching an old stuffed bear. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, and in that moment, I understood why I was still here. "Miss Clare," she cried, running toward me and wrapping her arms tightly around my waist. I knelt down and held her, breathing in the scent of her hair baby soap mixed with something warm and familiar, something that felt like a childhood memory I never had. "You're still here," she whispered. "Of course I am. I promised. Didn't I?" When I turned back, I saw Mrs. Leffer, Hardwick standing in the doorway, silently watching us. She didn't smile, but her gaze had softened. As I sat Elena back down and wiped an ink stain from her hand with a towel, the housekeeper stepped into the room. "Miss Clare," she said evenly, "we should talk after breakfast. Dominic has rules. Many rules. Not everyone here is a guest." "I understand," I replied, looking up at her. "No, you don't, but you will soon." She turned and left, leaving me with Elena, 100 unanswered questions, and the heavy realization that this place, no matter how warm the fire, how rich the meals, or how spotless the rooms, was not a home. It was Dominic Moretti's domain, and if I had stepped inside, I would have to face everything he left unspoken. But for today, at least, I was sitting beside Elena, watching her smile, and feeling something fragile I hadn't known for years: hope. They called it a mansion. But to me, it felt more like a fortress. Every window reinforced with bulletproof glass. Every corridor lined with discreetly hidden cameras behind polished walnut panels. Every third step revealed some quiet proof that safety here wasn't born from peace. It was built from fear. And that fear was what kept the name Dominic Moretti alive. The first days inside the mansion passed like a strange dream. Each morning, I woke to the chime of a small clock at the end of the hall. Elena was always the first to knock on my door. Her hair tangled, her eyes bright, her old bear tucked under one arm. Breakfast was served in the kitchen on the first floor, where Mrs. Hardwick ruled with quiet precision and a small notebook that never left her hand. She rarely spoke, but whenever I used the wrong knife or let Elena's milk go cold, she would simply rest a hand on my shoulder. A wordless correction. A firm but not cruel. Dominic was different. He wasn't often seen, but every time he appeared, it was as if an invisible current ran through the house. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His silence commanded more than any raised voice could. Elena always lit up when she saw him. She would run to him, calling, Papa, with the pure delight only a child can have. And Dominic, the man the city called heartless, would kneel and gather her into his arms with a tenderness that seemed to belong to another world. Once, I passed by his study late in the evening and saw him reading a storybook to her. The light fell gently over them, and in his eyes, there was no trace of the cold. Calculating man, people whispered about. Only a father who had lost too much and was desperately holding on to what little he had left. But there were other nights. Nights when the front door slammed after midnight. When the black SUV stopped outside at 2 a.m, and Dominic stepped inside wearing a dark coat that smelled faintly of smoke and metal. Once, I saw a smear of blood on his cuff. The way he spoke then, low, clipped, absolute, made 2 armed men bow their heads without a word. That wasn't Elena's father. That was someone else entirely. The man the city feared. The one whose enemies simply vanished. I lived between those 2 versions of him day after day, like walking a tightrope stretched over a pit. Dominic never broke his word. He never asked about my past. But he watched. Always watched. Sometimes from the balcony above. Sometimes from the end of a hallway. Sometimes through the tinted glass of his office. And I couldn't tell whether I was being protected or monitored. One late afternoon, Elena and I were painting beneath the back veranda when Dominic appeared, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching us. Papa, Elena called, grinning. Look, I drew Miss Claire. Does it look like her? His voice was deep but softer than usual. Yes, except her hair's prettier in real life, she said proudly. I laughed. But Dominic didn't. He only nodded, set the cup down on the table, and looked at me. She hasn't smiled like that in nearly a year. I said nothing. There was nothing I could say that would match the weight of those words. He didn't need to tell me why. His wife was gone. Elena had lost her mother. And since then, this house had been nothing but walls and silence until now. I don't know how long I can keep her safe, he said finally, eyes still fixed on his daughter. You understand that, don't you? I do, I replied quietly. Then stay, if you want. But be prepared. The dark doesn't stay still. And if you stand with Elena, it will drag you in too. I looked at him, not with fear or defiance, but with clarity. I don't need the light to love a child, I said softly. I just need to know I won't turn away when she needs me. He didn't answer. He turned and walked back into the house, leaving me with his warning still hanging in the air. But when I looked down at Elena, brushing bright colors onto the paper with her small, clumsy hands. I knew I wasn't going anywhere. Whether this place was a fortress, a prison, or the end of the world if it was where Elena needed me, then I would stay. It began on a gray morning during my second week at the Moretti estate. The ground was still damp from the night's rain, and the fog hadn't lifted when I found Dominic waiting in the back courtyard. He wore a dark gray tracksuit, leather gloves, and the air of a man preparing for something more serious than exercise. I don't like having people under my roof who don't know how to protect themselves, he said, voice firm but not as cold as usual. I raised a brow, coffee still warm in my hand. You're saying I'm weak. I'm saying you've been lucky to survive this long, he replied, eyes steady. And I don't believe in luck that lasts. There was no choice, and part of me knew he was right. So I nodded. That was how the morning lessons began before sunrise. While Elena still slept, and the mansion was wrapped in silence. At first, it was brutal. I wasn't 20 anymore. Not light on my feet. Not resilient. I fell often. The grass stained with dirt and sweat. My arms bruised. My knees scraped. Dominic never went easy on me. He didn't pull his punches or pretend I was fragile. He trained me as if my life depended on every dodge. Every strike, maybe, because, in his world, it did. But what startled me most wasn't his strength. It was his perception. He didn't just watch my movements. He read me. He knew the exact moment I was about to give up. When anger flared. When fear crept in. And he used that, pressing me until I broke through my limits. You're not weak because you lived on the streets, he said one morning. You're weak because you think you deserve to. The words hit like a blade with no blood. I stood frozen in the damp grass. Shoulders trembling, not from pain, but from something far deeper. Dominic said nothing else. He didn't apologize. He didn't comfort me. He just waited, giving me space to stand again. We kept training every morning. And sometimes in the late afternoons when Elena played in her room and Mrs. Hardwick pretended not to notice. Over time, those sessions became something more than physical lessons. They were strange. Quiet intervals suspended between us. Moments when he stopped being a man who commanded an empire, and I stopped being someone who didn't belong. We spoke of small things. The weather. Food. The book lying on the table. Then, somehow, I found myself telling him about my time as a nurse at a clinic in South Chicago. About the first death I ever witnessed. And about the night I decided never to go home again. Dominic didn't interrupt. He didn't offer sympathy or judgment. But he listened. And his silence wasn't heavy. It was the kind of quiet that feels safe enough for you to finally release what you've been holding for too long. One evening, after a longer training session than usual, I sat on the stone steps, breathless, my shirt damp with sweat. Dominic handed me a bottle of water. When I reached for it, he didn't let go right away. You know you're not like the others I've met, he said, his voice lower than usual. I looked up at him. His eyes, normally cold steel, held something different that night, something faint, like the warmth of embers that refused to die out. How am I different? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he sat beside me, leaning back on his hands, eyes turned toward the misty night sky. You're not afraid of me, he said quietly. Or at least, you don't let fear decide how you face me. I studied him for a moment. I've met enough frightening people in my life. A man who kills doesn't scare me as much as one who can ignore a child in need. Dominic turned his head, his gaze meeting mine directly. Fear, he murmured, is something I understand. What I've never understood is courage without reason. Neither of us spoke after that. The night stretched around us, the wind moving through the distant trees, the soft crackle of the fire from the courtyard below. In the heart of that cold fortress, there was an odd kind of tenderness, a fragile thread of connection, but real. And in that brief silence, I realized Dominic wasn't just a man willing to burn the world to protect his daughter. He was a lonely man trying, perhaps for the first time, to believe in something kinder than himself. And maybe I was doing the same. That night, the sky was starless, only a deep, black curtain pressing over the garden behind the mansion, where Dominic and I often ended our sessions in wordless routine. The small fireplace on the veranda was already lit, flames casting their warm orange light across the cold stone. Elena was asleep, and Mrs. Hardwick had long retired to her quarters. We were alone. I sat curled in a wooden chair, hands wrapped around a cup of ginger tea. Dominic leaned against the railing, eyes fixed on the dark line of trees, where the fog hung low like a veil. Neither of us spoke. Yet the silence this time felt different. Not distant, just still. The kind of quiet that exists between two people waiting for something natural to arrive. I used to have a little brother, I said at last, surprising even myself. He was 9. His name was Caleb. Dominic didn't move, but I knew he was listening. My mother was an addict. My father died when I was 5. We lived off food stamps and the charity of churches. I tightened my grip on the cup. I grew up fast, worked hard, earned a nursing scholarship. I thought I could fix everything, but no one teaches you how to save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Caleb died in a fire. I continued. My eyes locked on the flames as if they were my own memory burning there. She was high and locked the door. I was 20 minutes late. When I broke it down, he was already gone. Dominic turned slowly, the firelight catching his face angled. Still, unreadable. But his eyes were darker than usual, and I could see the storm behind them. I quit nursing after that. I said quietly. No one fired me. I just walked away. No records. No address. No trace. I thought if I stopped existing in the system, I couldn't hurt anyone again. He said nothing, just poured himself another inch of whiskey. Slow and measured, as if the act itself demanded care. And you, I asked softly, who made you the man you are now? He set the glass on the railing. For the first time, he sat beside me close enough for me to feel the weight of his silence. He didn't look at me when he spoke. His voice came low, steady, like he was reciting something carved into him long ago. Her name was Lillian. He said, she hated my world, but she loved me enough to endure it, until she couldn't anymore. He paused, swallowing the words before continuing. 3 years ago, there was a hit between 2 families. They aimed for me. She took the bullet. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. The pain in his voice told the rest. Dominic didn't cry, men like him don't. But his hand, clenched hard against his leg, betrayed the truth. After that, he said, I did what I know best. I erased every man involved, one by one, until there was nothing left. I didn't recoil. I didn't judge. I simply sat beside him, watching not the crime lord, but a man who had lost everything he loved and refused to forgive himself for it. Elena doesn't know everything, he said. Slower now. I keep her world clean, but I don't know if I do it for her, or because I can't stand seeing her mother's eyes looking back at me, reminding me of what I failed to protect. I reached out, placing my hand over his gently, not to console, but to share the silence. Dominic didn't pull away. For a moment, we sat like that, both of us holding on to nothing but the knowledge that grief had carved similar shapes in our souls. Because sometimes, people don't meet to heal each other. They meet to remember they're not alone in the wound. That night, there were no distant gunshots. No hurried phone calls. No echo of Mrs. Hardwick's watchful footsteps. Only the faint sound of piano keys drifting from the parlor below. and the scent of baked apple pie weaving through the quiet. For the first time since I had stepped into the Moretti mansion, the place felt alive, breathing like a real home. Elena had bathed, her soft hair carrying the scent of lavender. She wore a white cotton nightgown dotted with tiny rabbits, a gift. She said, "That Mrs. Hardwick picked just for me." We lay together on the long couch in the library, the golden lamplight glowing over the shelves that reached the ceiling. I read her a grim fairy tale, my voice calm and even. She didn't interrupt as usual. She just nestled closer, her small hand gripping my arm as if I might disappear if she let go. "Miss Clare," she whispered as I closed the book. "What if I wake up tomorrow and you're gone?" I froze for a moment. She didn't look up, only blinked slowly, her lashes brushing my sleeve. I stroked her hair, my chest tightening. "I'm not going anywhere," I murmured. "I'll be right here when you open your eyes." Elena nodded, and within minutes, she drifted into sleep, her breath soft and steady, her hand still holding onto me. He sat still. I'm afraid to move, watching her sleep. I was transported back to the nights when I was a nurse holding children as they slept through the sirens and the harsh glow of neon lights. But Elena wasn't like the others. She was the meeting point of two worlds, the gentleness of a mother long gone, and the storm that forever surrounded the man who loved her. I don't know how long I sat there like that. When I finally looked up, Dominic was standing in the doorway of the library. He didn't come in. He leaned against the frame, his hands in his pockets, his expression softer than I had ever seen it. There was no calculation in his eyes, no cold precision, only the quiet tenderness of a father watching his child safe in someone else's arms. I nodded to him. He nodded back once, then turned and walked away, leaving me and Elena in a fragile peace I didn't want to let go of. It was then I realized what I had been avoiding all along. I wasn't here only to protect Elena. I was here because I needed her as much as she needed me. I was no longer the woman who drifted through shelters and empty streets, surviving on charity and fear. I was living again, truly living. Each morning, someone waited for me to wake. Each night, a little girl trusted me without question. And sometimes, there was a man like Dominic Moretti standing somewhere in the shadows, guarding us without asking for anything in return. I smiled, not the weary, hollow kind I'd worn for years, but a quiet, steady smile, as if, after all the scars and the running, I'd finally found the missing piece of myself. Tonight wasn't special, just another night, but for me, it was the first one I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. For the first time in so long, I had a reason to stay. Not because of debt, pity, or fear, but because of a simple promise whispered by a little girl with bright eyes and a heart stitched together by pain. "You'll be here when I wake up." Right, and I knew I would keep that promise. It began to rain after midnight. Heavy drops tapped against the window like fingertips warning of something dark approaching. I woke to a faint sound barely there, but enough to pull me out of sleep. Elena lay beside me, still breathing softly, her small arms looped around my neck like an anchor holding me to the world. I held my breath. There were no footsteps, no voices, but something was wrong. The silence was too complete. In the Moretti mansion, even at night, there was always noise, the hum of security systems, the faint murmur of guards through radios, the low hum of heating vents. But now, nothing. It was as if someone had severed the cables of the world itself. I slipped out of bed, pulling the blanket gently over Elena, and moved toward the door. Just as my hand touched the handle, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Then came a crash from downstairs, sharp, heavy, final. A shout followed, short and strangled, then silence. I didn't think. I ran back to Elena, lifted her into my arms, and darted toward the wardrobe. The doors opened with a quiet creak, revealing an empty space too perfect, too ready, as if someone had planned for this moment. I climbed in, pulling Elena close, closing the doors behind us. She was awake now, her breath quick and trembling, but she didn't cry. "Listen to me," I whispered against her ear. "We're playing hide and seek. You have to be completely quiet." "Okay," Elena nodded, her wide eyes shimmering in the dark. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, certain, more than one. Voices low, fast, in a mix of Italian and English. Not Dominic's men. They were searching. The door to our room crashed open. The floorboards shuddered. A hoarse voice barked something. Then glass shattered a vase. Maybe. A shadow passed across the narrow slit of light in the wardrobe and stopped. I held Elena tighter. The door burst open. In that instant, I didn't think of dying. I only saw Elena, her eyes locked on mine. "Desperate." Trusting, I lunged forward, kicking the man square in the chest. He staggered but didn't fall. I threw my weight into him, slamming him against the vanity table, my hands finding the first hard object within reach, a porcelain lamp. I swung. The lamp shattered. The gunshot followed. A bullet tore through the air, embedding in the wall inches from my head. Elena screamed. I grabbed the gun from the man's hand as he fell, my fingers moving on instinct, safety off. Grip, firm, training or survival. I didn't know, only that something inside me had awakened. Another man burst into the room. I fired. The sound was deafening, tearing through the mansion's silence like thunder. He dropped before he could pull the trigger. I scooped Elena into my arms and ran. My hands left streaks of blood on her nightgown. But there was no time to care. Down the hallway, toward the stairs, flashes of light. Shouts. Gunfire. And Dominic's voice unmistakable, roaring from below. "Claire, stay with the girl." I turned and darted into a storage room, locking the door behind us. Elena was crying now, but softly, holding onto me with trembling fingers. I wrapped my body around hers, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. One thought pulsed in my head: keep her alive. The pounding on the door grew louder. They were coming. I raised the gun, pressing Elena behind me. The door burst open. I fired. One man dropped. Another lunged from the side. We hit the ground, his hand crushing my throat. My vision blurred, the edges dimming until another gunshot exploded right beside my ear. The grip on my neck loosened. The man fell limp. I turned. Dominic stood in the doorway, gun still smoking. He looked at me, not saying a word. His eyes swept over me, then to Elena, sobbing in the corner. I dropped to my knees, pulling the child into my arms. Blood, sweat, and tears blended together. Dominic stepped closer and rested a hand on my shoulder. For the first time, his eyes weren't cold. They were wet and deep. "You saved her, again," he said quietly. I nodded, unable to speak. That night, the Moretti mansion was no longer a fortress. It was a battlefield. But in the midst of gunfire and blood, I realized something with absolute clarity. I was no longer a guest here. I belonged, and I would not leave, not while Elena still needed me. Not while Dominic stood in the dark, keeping the fire alive for both of us. I don't remember standing after the last shot was fired. Only the blood on my hands. The gun still hot in my grip. The room reeked of gunpowder and iron, a nauseating blend of smoke and death. Dominic carried Elena away. She was sobbing, eyes wide and terrified, looking back at me over his shoulder. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was over, but I couldn't. I slid down against the cold wall, my fingers still locked around the gun as if letting go would make me disappear. The man I'd shot lay a few steps away, eyes open, staring at nothing. A dark pool spread across the polished floorboards. I had killed a man. Not in a dream. Not by accident. I had aimed. I had pulled the trigger. I had ended a life. My body began to shake. Not from injury, from something deeper. Breaking inside my chest. I didn't cry. The tears came on their own. Soundless and unstoppable. My heart pounded until it hurt. I lifted a trembling hand, smearing at the streak of blood across my cheek. But it only spread wider. And for the first time, I felt the true weight of what it meant not to survive, but to live with what survival costs. Dominic turned back toward me. He didn't rush. Didn't shout. I didn't ask questions. He simply walked over, stopped in front of me, and looked for a long moment. Then he bent down and gently took the gun from my hands. He set it aside, lowered himself onto the floor across from me, and in his eyes, I saw none of the authority, none of the steel that usually marked him. It was the look of someone who had witnessed this before too many times and understood it in a way words could never reach. My throat burned. My voice was barely there. I killed him. Dominic nodded once. Yes, you did. You say that too easily. No. Claire. His tone was low, measured, almost careful. Nothing about a first kill is easy. I'm only choosing not to make it harder for you. I turned away, unable to look at the body. My hands clenched at the hem of my blood-stained shirt, grasping at anything solid enough to keep me from falling into the pit that had opened inside my mind. I didn't want to kill anyone. I whispered. I just wanted to protect her. And you did, Dominic said. You didn't kill out of hate. You killed to survive. To protect a child. That doesn't make you a monster. I looked up at him, my eyes red and raw. Then why do I feel like I'm not myself anymore? Maybe because you're not. He replied quietly. But sometimes, Claire, we lose pieces of ourselves to keep the last good part alive. You kept Elena safe. That's what matters. The silence that followed was long and heavy. Then Dominic stood and extended a hand to me. He hesitated, but finally reached for it. His hand was large, steady, warm, pulling me up as if he were lifting the part of me that had fallen away with the sound of that gunshot. He didn't let go until I was steady on my feet. I met his eyes, and for the first time, I saw something new in them. Not pity, not command, understanding deep and wordless. Like two people who had both walked through fire and recognized the ashes on each other's skin. Dominic took me back to my room and told Mrs. Arias, Hardwick, to bring hot water and clean clothes. In the bathroom, I peeled off the layers caked with blood and stood beneath the running water, letting the heat wash over me. It rinsed away everything, except the hollow ache still burning in my chest. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat beside the bed, watching Elena breathe, her tiny chest rising and falling with each dream. I had killed a man, but she was alive. And that truth, unbearable and sacred all at once, told me I could never go back. I had crossed a line, and part of me knew I didn't want to return. I had gone too far to leave this place. And now, I didn't want to. Not while Elena needed me. Not while Dominic looked at me as someone who finally belonged. The next morning, I sat on a bench in the garden. The trees were damp with dew, their branches trembling faintly in the pale winter light. The air was cold, but I didn't feel it. The chill inside me was different, deeper, quieter. It wasn't the wind that froze me. It was the emptiness left behind. 3 days had passed since that night. 3 days since the first shot I fired. Since the moment I saw the man's eyes go blank. Since Dominic told me I had done the right thing. But the right thing hung in my mind like a stain that wouldn't fade. I couldn't eat, couldn't rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, not out of fear but disbelief that I had held the power to end another human being. Even if he was evil. Even if it was to save a child. The question kept echoing in my head if I could do it once. Could I do it again? And if I did, who would I become? You're not wearing a coat. Mrs. Hardwick's voice came from behind me. Firm but softer than usual. I didn't turn. I heard her measured footsteps approach. Then felt the weight of a wool shawl being laid across my knees. She didn't speak again. Just sat beside me. After a long while, I said quietly, I thought you didn't like me. I don't like most people. She said, her voice even, unhurried. But I know the difference between someone who does wrong out of selfishness and someone who does what's hard for the sake of others. I turned to her. She was wearing a dark sweater today. Her hair pinned neatly back, though a few silver strands escaped around her temples. She wore no makeup. No jewelry. But her eyes had the depth of someone who had seen too much and still chose to look straight ahead. You know, I killed someone. I said softly. I have eyes. Claire. And ears. But more importantly, I have a heart that's been broken before. She met my gaze. Do you think you're the first person to walk into this house with shaking hands and haunted eyes? I don't even know who I am anymore. I murmured, my voice cracking. I used to keep people breathing when their hearts stopped. Now I'm the one who pulled the trigger. Then remember why you did. She said firmly. Not for vengeance. Not to prove anything. You did it so a child could live. So a father could still hold his daughter at night. Hold on to that truth. I turned my face toward the sunlight breaking through the trees. The light flickered over my closed eyelids. The cold wind brushed my skin, thinning the heaviness in my chest just a little. Do you know what I did before I became a housekeeper? She asked suddenly. I shook my head. I was a secretary. Worked for a lawyer. Her tone remained calm. Almost distant. One day, he was shot right in front of the courthouse. Blood all over my clothes. And the man responsible was Dominic Moretti. I whipped my head toward her. Stunned. But she didn't look back. She only exhaled slowly. Her eyes half closed. I hated him, she said. But I also remember him bending down to pick up my glasses from the blood-soaked pavement. He didn't apologize. He just gave me something else, another kind of life. In another kind of world. One without justice by law. But justice by choice. And I stayed. Because sometimes we don't get to choose what happens to us. Only how we walk through it. He swallowed hard. Part of me wanted to stop listening. But another part, the one that was still breaking, clung to her words like a lifeline. Claire. Guilt won't destroy you, she said. Silence will. Isolation will. So speak. Breathe. Keep doing what's right. Even when it stops feeling good. That's how you stay human. I nodded. My throat tight. Eyes stinging, but my heart strangely calm. Mrs. Hardwick didn't embrace me. She wasn't that kind of woman. But when she stood and rested a hand on my shoulder before walking away, I knew I'd received something rarer than comfort, acceptance. I was still Claire, even with blood on my hands. And no matter how dark the road ahead, I wouldn't walk it alone. That evening, the sky above the Moretti estate turned a deep, endless blue, fading into the tree line at the horizon. After dinner, Elena went to bed earlier than usual. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "You'll still be here." Right in a voice so small and fragile, it made my heart ache. I held her close and whispered back, "Always." Watching her disappear behind her bedroom door like a promise that kept growing stronger each day. I turned to leave, but saw Dominic standing alone in the library. The golden firelight cast sharp angles across his face, deepening the lines that time and loss had carved there. He held a glass of whiskey, eyes fixed on the flickering flames. There was no hardness in his expression, only stillness, and a kind of exhaustion that comes when a man has carried too much for too long. "You look like you're talking to the past," I said softly, stepping closer. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that flickers and fades before it fully forms. The past doesn't talk much, he said. It just stands there, staring back, reminding you of everything you wish you could forget. I walked closer, stopping just near enough to feel his breath without touching him. Dominic set his glass down, turned toward me, and met my gaze. "Claire," he said softly, his voice lower than I had ever heard it. "There's something I should have said long ago, but I hesitated." I lifted my eyes to him. In the dim light, his expression was stripped of its usual defenses. No anger, no calculation, no mask. His eyes were like a sky, heavy with gray clouds, full of unsaid things waiting for air. "I've loved you," he said. Each word weighted and slow. "Maybe for a long time. Maybe since the night you ran through the rain with Elena in your arms. Or maybe that morning when you looked straight at me and didn't flinch." I didn't move. The confession didn't sound like something torn from a romance novel. There were no embellishments, no grand gestures, yet it tightened something deep inside me. Not out of surprise, but because some part of me had always known. It only needed to be spoken aloud. But I was afraid. He continued, his voice steady, but quiet. Afraid that if I came too close, I'd destroy the last good thing left in me. I've touched too many rotten things, ruined too many lives. I couldn't bear for you to be another. I looked at him for a long moment before speaking, my voice steadier than I thought possible. "I'm not as fragile as you think. Dominic, I've already lost everything once. I've been to the bottom, but I'm still here, still breathing, and I still know what's worth believing in." He lowered his head, as though my words had struck a place he'd kept buried too long. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, almost breaking. "I don't know how to love without loss. My wife, Lillian, she made me believe I could live differently. But when she died, the world reminded me what I was, a man who doesn't get to have love." I stepped closer, laying my hand gently over his. Dominic didn't pull away. Instead, he closed his fingers around mine firm, almost desperate, as if afraid that letting go would mean losing me too. "No one gets to decide what you deserve," I said quietly. "I'm not asking for a perfect love. I just need someone brave enough to stay when I need them most." Dominic looked at me for a long time. When he finally leaned down and pressed a kiss to the back of my hand, I knew this wasn't a passing moment. It was a promise, wordless but real, forged in presence rather than speech. That night, the fire in the library burned longer than usual, and between two people who had been broken by loss, something was slowly mending, fragile, but steady. The fear was gone. The caution was gone. What remained was a quiet trust, just beginning to take shape beneath their scars. The next morning, the sky was astonishingly clear. Sunlight poured through the long corridors of the house, making the paintings on the walls seem brighter, and the garden smelled of wet grass and Mrs. Wenceslas, Hardwick's early tea. But Dominic stayed wrapped in his own private shadows. All morning he avoided me, not coldly, not with intent, but with the stillness of a man wrestling something within himself. From the upstairs hall, I saw him watching Elena play in the garden with Mrs. Persis. Hardwick. His face was a storm of contradictions, tenderness, and fear tangled together, as if he were terrified of losing what he'd only just begun to name. I walked to stand beside him. For a long while, we said nothing. Just watched the child laugh, her hair catching the wind, her feet scattering petals as she ran, untouched by the word loss. "You're thinking of pulling away, aren't you?" I asked, my voice calm. Dominic tilted his head slightly but didn't look at me. "I'm not sure I can give you what you deserve. I'm not asking you to give me anything," I said, still watching Elena. "I'm asking you not to retreat every time your heart starts to feel something." He fell silent. then turned toward me. His eyes this time were deeper, sadder. Claire, you don't understand. My world isn't like yours. It doesn't forgive weakness. It doesn't make room for tenderness. Loving you could make me vulnerable. And when I'm vulnerable, the men out there will kill everything I care about. I turned to face him. You're wrong. Dominic, love doesn't make people weak. Running from it does. I touched his hand lightly, not to pull, not to persuade, but to remind. Do you think I'm not afraid I've lost too? I've fallen apart. But Elena, this place you gave me a reason to stand up again. I'm not the woman hiding in the dark anymore. And I won't let you stay trapped in fear. He bowed his head slightly, his shoulders softening, as if my words had struck the center of his turmoil, that place where instinct and longing clashed. You can command 100 men. Dominic, I whispered, but true strength is believing you deserve to be loved. He looked at me for a long time. It wasn't the gaze of a crime lord or a hardened father. It was the unguarded look of a man who, for the first time, dared to hope that he might be worthy of something pure. Claire, he said at last, his voice hoarse. If one day everything collapses, if you get pulled into the worst parts of who I am, will you regret it? I stepped closer, placed my hand over his chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath his dark shirt. I'll only regret never daring to love you. He tightened his grip on my hand. No hesitation this time. No, distance. Between us, there was no past. No wound. No line left to cross. Only two people standing still in the storm, choosing each other. And in the soft morning light, Dominic Moretti, a man built from ruin, finally let someone in. Not as a savior, but as a part of himself he no longer wanted to lose. That night, the mansion fell quiet, not with fear, but with a kind of peace so fragile it felt sacred. The wind slipped through the slightly open windows, carrying the scent of jasmine from the southern garden. Moonlight spilled across the wooden floor in a thin, silver trail, like someone had scattered light to reach the untouched corners. I entered the library, the one place Dominic always retreated to when he wanted to shut out the world. He stood by the shelves, fingers tracing the spine of an old novel, though his eyes were somewhere far beyond the page. When he heard my steps, he turned. He didn't speak, just looked at me. The space between us no longer felt like distance. It was an opening waiting to be filled. I stepped closer, stopping just a few feet away. I didn't come here to make you choose between me and the life you've built, I said, my voice soft but steady. I came because my heart no longer knows how to live without you. Dominic looked at me for a long time before exhaling softly. Like surrender. I thought keeping my distance would protect you. But the truth is, that distance only made me realize how easily I could lose you. I smiled and took another step closer. You don't have to be perfect, Dominic. You just have to be real. He lifted his hand and touched my cheek. His palm was rough, calloused by years of power and war, yet strangely warm. I didn't think I could ever love again. But every day I see you with Elena, hear your laughter in the kitchen. I feel your presence in the smallest moments I know I already do. I love you, Claire, enough that it terrifies me. I looked up and whispered, don't be afraid. I'm here. And then he kissed me, not with urgency, not with hunger, but with reverence, slow, uncertain, as if each second might be the last. I wrapped my arms around him, pulling him closer, letting our heartbeats fall into the same rhythm. We didn't need words, didn't need promises. There was only breath, the gentle brush of skin, and two souls finding each other again in the dark. Dominic lifted me easily, as though I were the most fragile and precious thing he had ever held. That night, the bedroom at the end of the hall was no longer a room for rest. It became a sanctuary where two people who had known loss began. piece by piece, to feel whole again. The dim light from the bedside lamp traced the lines of his face, the scar along his jaw, the eyes that had seen too much cruelty but now softened under my gaze. He undressed me as though unwrapping something sacred. Each movement slow, deliberate, and I let him see everything, the scars, the bruises, the evidence of survival. When he whispered my name against the quiet warmth of the night, I knew I was no longer a stranger in Dominic Moretti's world. I had become part of it, not through power or title, but through love. Later, we lay together in silence, hands intertwined, neither of us speaking. Dominic pulled me against his chest, his heartbeat steady, unyielding a promise without words. I closed my eyes, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing, and in that moment, I understood something deeper than happiness, safety, not the kind built from walls and locks, but the safety that comes from being loved, from being chosen. Despite all the imperfections, when I whispered, "I love you," into the dark, I felt him hold me tighter. His breath trembled just enough for me to know that, at last, his heart had allowed itself to believe in something it had long thought was never meant for him. That night, we didn't sleep. We didn't need dreams, because after all the pain, all the fear, all the years of emptiness, the dream had finally become real. By morning, sunlight spilled through the gap in the curtains, scattering golden ripples across the floor. Dominic was gone from the bed. The sheets on his side were still warm, meaning he hadn't been gone long. I sat up, pulled on his shirt that hung loosely from a chair, and stepped into the quiet hallway. I found him in his study. The door was slightly ajar. Through the gap, I saw him standing by the window, his back to me, a thick folder and a folded map in hand. His voice was low and sharp as he spoke into the phone, Italian, threading through English, the language of a world far from ordinary life. I understood. He was leaving today, to face the man who had broken into our home, the one who had threatened Elena, me, and the fragile peace we had only just begun to build. When the call ended, I knocked softly and entered. Dominic turned toward me, his eyes softening when he saw me wearing his shirt, but then, almost immediately, the hardness returned. He was rebuilding his armor after a night of vulnerability. "Where are you going?" I asked, though I already knew. He didn't answer right away. He walked to the desk, picked up his coat and his gun, then looked back at me. "One of the men who attacked us survived. He's from an old faction that betrayed my family years ago. Now he thinks I've gone weak. He needs to be reminded why this city once bowed to my name." I stepped closer, resting my hand on his. "You don't have to prove anything anymore. Dominic, you already have Elena. You already have me. That's your strength." He gave a faint, tired smile. "And because of that, because I finally have something worth losing, I have to end this. For good." I said nothing. I understood. Love hadn't made him weaker. It had made him fiercer. Because now he had someone to protect. I nodded and tightened my grip on his hand. "Then come back," I whispered. "Don't make today the last day Elena sees her father walk out that door." He nodded, his eyes deep, warm. Then he leaned down and kissed me, not quickly, but with the quiet certainty of a vow. When he stepped through the doorway, he paused and looked back one last time. "If I don't return before sunset, then I'll come find you," I said, smiling through the ache, "even if it's in hell." Dominic's lips curved faintly, and he nodded before leaving. His footsteps echoed down the marble hall, soft, steady, but inside my chest. Each step felt like the tick of a clock counting down to something unnamed. I spent the morning with Elena. She asked where her father had gone, and I told her he had something important to take care of, but that he'd be home soon. She nodded, too used to a life filled with silences and disappearances. But today, There was a look in her eyes that unsettled me, a flicker of worry, of knowing. We sat by the window, reading stories, coloring, building puzzles, but I couldn't focus. Every vibration of my phone made my heart lurch. Every sound from the hallway made me flinch. I tried to smile, to stay calm, because I knew if I looked afraid, she would feel it too. By afternoon, clouds began to gather. The sunlight drained from the terrace, leaving the house in a muted gray. I brewed tea but didn't drink it. I asked Mrs. Hardwick to check every lock and double the guards. Then I returned to the living room, where Elena still sat, her small hands folded in her lap, waiting as if sheer hope could call her father home. When the clock struck 5, I stepped out onto the porch, eyes fixed on the long driveway winding through the trees. My chest tightened not from fear, but from the quiet realization that I wasn't ready to live in a world without him. And then, in the distance, I saw the familiar black car approaching through the gates. My breath caught. My heart began to beat again. Dominic was home. And in that instant, I knew I would never again be just the one who waited. I was the one he returned to. He arrived as the sky turned amber. The sunset dusted the roof of the mansion in gold. Fragile and fleeting, I heard the car stop, the door open, and his footsteps heavy but steady on the stone path. I carried Elena to the porch. When Dominic stepped through the gate, he stopped. Elena ran first, throwing herself into his arms. He knelt down, holding her tight, one hand pressed against her back, the other cradling her head with a tenderness that could break your heart. He stood still, watching. He looked up at me, and I looked back. No blood, no wounds, but his eyes were darker, deeper, as if he'd walked through a place where a man's soul is stripped bare. That night, after Elena had fallen asleep, Dominic came to find me in the small reading room beside the library. I was pouring tea, my hands trembling slightly from the hours of waiting. He said nothing at first, just sat across from me, watching as if memorizing the quiet movements, the rise and fall of my breath. "Claire," he said finally, breaking the long silence. Today, when I stood face to face with the man who betrayed me, I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt tired. I didn't answer. I waited. And he went on. "I used to believe strength meant control," Dominic said quietly. "That to survive, you had to be hard. Unfeeling that compassion was a weakness. But then you walked in, carrying a kind of light I'd forgotten existed, and everything I believed began to shake." I set my teacup down and looked at him. "You don't have to be anyone else. Dominic, I don't love you because you're strong. I love you because, even in all that darkness, you still chose to protect what was fragile. You chose Elena. You chose me." Dominic exhaled, a sound that felt like the release of something old and heavy. "Do you know what I'm most afraid of? It's not losing everything, it's changing you. Making you like me, living with violence. Distrust. Always ready to fight. Always preparing to lose." I moved closer and sat beside him, placing my hand on his, the hand that had pulled triggers, carried scars, held too many ghosts. "I have changed, Dominic," I said softly, "but not in the way you fear. I'm stronger now, wiser, but I still have my heart, and I choose to use it to love you." He turned to me, the walls in his eyes finally falling away. "Then if I change, if I let go of part of that darkness, will you stay?" I nodded, without hesitation. "I've already chosen to stay. Not because you need me, but because I need to be here with you, with Elena. This is my home, Dominic, and if you truly want to change, I'll walk through it with you." Something softened in him. He reached up, brushed a strand of hair from my face, and pulled me into his arms. There were no promises, No vows. Only two people who understood that love doesn't save everything. But it's the only place where real change begins. That night, we didn't speak of the future. We simply sat together, listening to the wind move through the trees beyond the garden. Yet, in that silence, something profound had already happened. Dominic had let go of his fear, and I had opened my heart wide enough to embrace all of him, even the parts still shadowed. We didn't start over. We continued from the place where our pain and mistakes had led us, closer than before, and that, to me, was love in its truest form. One gentle morning, when the sun was warm but not harsh and the breeze just cool enough to soften the air, we took Elena to a small park near the lake. There was an old wooden bench covered in fallen leaves, and ancient oaks towering above us as if they had witnessed centuries of stories. Dominic sat barefoot on the grass, sleeves rolled up, shoes tossed aside, toes sinking into the earth, as though for the first time he allowed himself to feel something that simple. I sat beside him, our fingers intertwined, my heart light as if the world had finally stopped demanding that we keep our guard up. Elena played nearby, hopping across stones along the path, clutching the worn teddy bear I had mended after the night of the break-in. I turned to look at Dominic. He was smiling a real smile, one that carried no shadow, no defense. It was the smile of a man who had walked through the darkest part of himself and chosen to live differently. Not just for his daughter, but for himself. He turned toward me, squeezed my hand tighter. No words were needed. I knew, in that quiet glance, that he had chosen us not between power and love, but as his quiet commitment to a life that finally felt real. Elena ran over, her cheeks flushed from the sun, her eyes sparkling with joy. She threw herself into my arms, then rested her head on Dominic's shoulder and whispered, "This is the good dream." We both froze, not because of the words themselves, but because of who they came from, a child who had seen chaos, who had known fear, yet could now recognize peace. That small sentence was more than innocence. It was forgiveness, a child's quiet absolution for the world and for her father. I looked up at the sky, my heart swelling with gratitude, grateful that I hadn't turned back when everything seemed unbearable, grateful that Dominic had found the courage to lay down his power for something pure, and above all, grateful that we still had each other. In a world where everything can vanish in the blink of an eye, the presence of a small, imperfect family built on trust and love felt nothing short of a miracle. This story isn't a fairy tale. It's full of loss, darkness, and impossible choices. But that's exactly what makes it real. Because love has never been a sign of weakness. It's the greatest strength we carry when we face a world that's broken. And family, even one made of imperfect people, can still become the safest place on earth when it's built with honesty and heart. And you, how did this story make you feel? Did it stir something inside you? Have you ever found yourself standing between love and fear, not knowing which to choose? If you have, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your voice, because every story is a life, and every shared feeling is a bridge connecting hearts that have known pain and still believe in hope. If today's story touched you, if it made you pause, reflect, or simply feel, please like this video, subscribe, and share our channel, Underworld Love Stories. We'll continue bringing you moving, powerful stories that reach deep into the human soul, for everyone who believes that even in the darkest corners of the world, love can still bloom. Thank you for spending your time with us today. May you carry strength, kindness, and faith in the goodness that still surrounds us. Wishing you health, joy, peace, and the courage to always find light, even in your darkest days. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you in the next episode of Underworld Love Stories.